Big, sweeping reforms, they're almost always messy at the start, right? Today, we're diving into a really critical moment for Australia's university system, a new bill that could honestly reshape higher education for decades. And this quote from Professor Alex Zelinsky pretty much sums up what we're talking about today. Don't let perfect get in the way of good uni reforms. And that's really the core issue here, this constant push and pull between trying to find a solution that works right now versus holding out for some ideal one that, let's be honest, might never actually show up. Okay, so to really get what's at stake, just think about some of Australia's biggest, most important reforms. I'm talking about things like Medicare or the NDIS. The article we're looking at makes a great point that these services, which we now see as essential, had incredibly tough and controversial starts. They weren't perfect out of the gate, not by a long shot, but they were a start. And that's the lens we should probably be using to look at this new university bill. All right, so first things first, let's actually unpack the problem this whole reform is trying to solve. Welcome to Section 1, the University Funding Puzzle. So the argument here is that the way we fund universities right now, it's just fundamentally broken. It's created these, quote, distortions that are hurting pretty much everyone involved, from the students to the universities themselves, and even Australia's broader national interest. And one of the biggest, most obvious problems, well, it's how this whole thing hits students. The argument is that if you're studying business, arts, or humanities, you are basically being forced to carry a huge, deeply unfair part of the cost for your own degree. So just how unfair are we talking? Well, the article boils it down to one pretty shocking number, 93%. And this chart, wow, it really shows you what that number means in practice. For students in those fields, they're paying for 93% of their degree, with the government just chipping in that tiny little 7%. That massive imbalance, that's really the core of the whole issue. And, a system like this creates all sorts of knock-on effects. Critical fields like science and tech end up underfunded. Universities have to rely on really high fees from international students just to prop up other programs. And it even creates this environment where the big, cashed-up universities can just go and poach students from smaller regional ones. Basically, the author's point is, it's a system that's just not working for anyone in the long run. Okay, so that's the mess we're in. What's the proposed fix? Let's dive into Section 2 and talk about the ATEC. ATEC stands for the Australian Tertiary Education Commission. And the big idea here is to set up this new, independent body to act as a kind of guardian for the whole higher education sector. The main goal? To bring some much-needed stability, certainty, and smart oversight to how our universities are funded and run. So what would it actually do? Well, its job would be pretty wide-ranging. It would manage how many new student places are created, act as a neutral fact-checker on government policies, and help make sure our universities are tackling big national priorities like productivity. And this is a big one. It would also be responsible for making sure regional universities don't get left in the dust. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. The author, who's a university vice-chancellor, isn't saying this bill is perfect. Not at all. Instead, he's basically saying, look, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it does have to be good enough. And to figure that out, he's got a test. This brings us to Section 3, 3 minimum standards. So, the author puts it really simply. For this ATEC bill to be a real step forward and not a step sideways, it has to hit 3 key benchmarks. They're not optional. And here they are, plain and simple. The commission needs independence, it needs expertise, and it needs real pricing power. So let's break down what each of these really means. All right, first up, independence. This is all about how much freedom ATEC would have to do its job without political interference. In a perfect world, it'd be a Tier 1 agency, totally independent, with its own staff giving fearless advice. But the article suggests a Tier 2 body, which has some government oversight, could work, as a good enough compromise to get things started. Okay, standard number 2, expertise. You gotta have the right people for the job, right? The source argues that the current plan for just 3 commissioners is, and I quote, underdone for a group that's supposed to be managing Australia's 4th biggest export industry. I mean, that's huge. You need some serious brain power to handle that. And finally, we get to what might be the most important one of all. It's all about giving ATEC some real teeth. It has to have the power to actually look at what a degree truly costs to deliver and then recommend a fair price for both students and the government. The bottom line is, this would let it finally fix that 93% distortion we saw earlier and get to the root cause of all the student debt. Okay, so we have the problem, the solution, and the test. What happens now? let's get into our final section. What happens next? Which brings us to the million-dollar question, right? What's actually on the line if the politicians can't agree and this whole bill just falls apart? Well, the first thing at risk is cold, hard cash. We're talking $400 million. That money is set aside to create more university spots in 2027. But here's the catch. That funding is tied to having a body like ATEC in place to manage the growth properly. No ATEC, maybe no money. But if we zoom out, it's not just about the immediate cash. There's a much bigger national goal at stake. Australia wants 80% of its adult workforce to have a tertiary qualification by 2050. And ATEC is seen as the key piece of the puzzle to make that happen. And then there's the risk that, well, nothing happens at all, and we get stuck in limbo. The author points to another bill that failed in 2024 as a kind of warning. It just created more uncertainty and damaged our reputation. The big fear here is that if they can't agree on ATEC, it could throw the whole university sector into chaos. And this quote from the article really just nails the whole argument. The ATEC bill isn't supposed to be the final word. It deserves to be approached as a vital early-stage opportunity for the continual improvement of Australian higher education, and not the last word. In other words, it's not about finding the perfect final answer right now. It's just about getting started. And that really leaves us with the big question at the heart of this entire debate, a question that honestly applies to so much more than just university reform. When you're facing a really complex problem, is an imperfect first step better than taking no step at all? It's definitely something to think about.